Hello and welcome to Biggest I Ever Had with Dan and Dave, a show where we talk about some of the biggest hits in UK chart music. This week we're going to do a roundup of the top 25, what we thought about the songs that we've talked about, and we're also going to take a look at some of the songs in the top 200 that we think should have been higher up on the list. So let's start by talking about what we thought of the songs that we've had to review. Do you think that the list has been a good overview of the UK public's taste?
In a weird way, it kind of has, because I think the majority of the songs in the top 25 are decidedly average. And I think if you, collectively got a huge group of people, the average is going to be, pretty poor. So most of the songs being middle-of-the-road, sort of kind of rubbish songs that are connected either to a fad or a TV show or some big event makes sense. But at the same time, it's quite an underwhelming top 25. There's a lot more songs that I dislike than like, and even the ones that I dislike, although in the episodes when we recorded them I seemed quite angry, it was usually just because I'd been drinking. On reflection, they don't sort of garner that much of a reaction from me, or at least that's how I feel. I mean, there's a few hidden gems of great songs that I really want to talk about, like Cher or Frankie Goes to Hollywood, or I'm trying to think what else was in the top 25 that I quite liked,
Bohemian Rhapsody?
Bohemian Rhapsody, yeah. There were songs that I liked, but, generally they were pretty forgettable, on the whole. Anyway, that's my kind of opinion of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think that it's probably reflective of public mood at that particular time, because obviously there's lots of Christmas stuff, there's lots of charity-related singles, and there's lots of things that tied in with movies. So I think it really kind of says that the public's attention span it only lasts for a brief moment, but it's able to go out and purchase millions upon millions of copies of stuff. So out of the top 25, what has been your favourite song?
Probably my favourite was I'm going to say Frankie Goes to Hollywood. It was probably, I mean, I love that song. I think it's one of the best songs ever written. I'm glad it's as high as it was, because a lot of the other thing I would say about the top 25, a lot of them haven't had that much staying power. They were super popular when they came out. Obviously, they sold millions of copies, but then you don't really hear them on the radio much. I'm thinking of songs like Mull of Kintyre or Unchained Melody by Robson and Jerome. They were kind of songs that came out, people really cared about them for a very short amount of time, by which I mean a few months. I mean, I know Mull of Kintyre charted for 12 weeks or whatever, or 9 weeks or whatever it was, so obviously that's a reasonable amount of time, but I don't feel that many people were listening to it 5 years later. I'm sure there probably were ridiculous Paul McCartney fans that were, but the general public seemed to move on. The only one that of the songs that have had staying power, it's either been that they're Christmas songs and they just come up every year when it's Christmas, or they're really, really great songs like Believe by Cher, which stand the test of time, and I think their popularity will only grow over the years. In a lot of the top 25, if you went to sort of your average person on the street who's, say, under 20, because most of the songs are 20 plus years old, and you played them a lot of the songs, they might be able to tell you the artist is, but they probably couldn't tell what year it came out, when it, a lot of them just haven't had that staying power. And I think that was a big takeaway going through the list for me, is just how much you go. I mean, there wasn't anything I hadn't heard of, but there was a lot of things that I hadn't listened to since they came out. Or I'd only ever seen them on lists of the top biggest songs of all time. They weren't things that you would flick through the radio and absolute 80s will play. They won't be playing one of the songs on the list that was super popular. They'll be playing songs that people actually like.
I think my favourite's Bohemian Rhapsody, because like you were saying in that episode, if you haven't seen that episode, go check it out. That it kind of, it comes back in and out of fashion. It has every generation pretty much has a Bohemian Rhapsody bit, whether it's through the Bohemian Rhapsody film, whether it's through Wayne's World, whether it's through the charity release after Freddie Mercury's death. I think it relates to a lot of people. It still sounds very different to what's around today, and it did have a huge influence on music.
I mean, I was surprised by how much I hate Mull of Kintyre, and I stand by that. When we do next week's episode, the season finale, I don't want to use hyperbole and say that that's like the worst song of all time. But everything that song represents to me makes that the worst. Also, I feel like the song that we're doing next week that's number one is the worst song to be number one. You know, it's an embarrassment to like popular culture that is number one. And not only is that number one, I don't foresee any of the earlier songs ever overtaking it. So kind of, at least for the rest of my lifetime, that will probably always be number one. Like, Bohemian Rhapsody might one day go from being number 3 to number 2. I could see Bohemian Rhapsody maybe overtaking Band-Aid as time goes on and being the second biggest single of all time. But I don't see it ever overtaking number one. And because of that, I guess I'm probably going to say that's the worst one. That or Mull of Kintyre or Unchained Melody.
I think Mull of Kintyre, at least it tried to do something different. You got some bagpipes, it was a waltz. That's all like new territory for the list. But Unchained Melody was just a standard cover, and I think the lack of originality for me makes that probably worse than Mull of Kintyre.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to sort of... I think I've said this before. Weirdly, stuff that underwhelms me and isn't interesting, I dislike more than something that's really bad.
Yeah.
Like, whenever you see lists of, like, the worst, like, number ones of all time, one of the things that's always in there is Axel F. with Crazy Frog. And I don't hate that song. I mean, I don't like it. I wouldn't
It's
sit
annoying.
down... It's annoying, but it's meant to be. It's a novelty record. Like, same with, Black Lace with, Agadoo. Another song that's awful and is always like, one of the worst singles ever released. But at least it's memorable.
Yeah, and it's not meant to be anything more than just annoying. Like, I think they're called earworms, aren't they? Songs that get stuck in your head. It's
supposed to just be played at a children's party. Like, I can't... Somebody who was like, I love, getting drunk and putting on Agadoo, I'd be like, that's fine, whatever, you do you. But somebody who's like, I love getting drunk and sticking on Robson and Jerome's cover of Unchained Melody, I'd be like, who are you?
Yeah.
Like, I just don't get it. Like I said, it's weird, but because the underwhelming songs are the ones that annoy me the most, they're also kind of the hardest to talk about because there's nothing distinctive about them. A lack of originality and a lack of anything memorable makes it much harder to like pinpoint exactly what's wrong with it. And that will always be worse to me. Something mediocre that's boring will always annoy me more than something that's really crap but interesting. Particularly as this podcast is basically us overanalyzing songs. So doing an hour episode on Robson and Jerome's cover of Unchained Melody requires multiple beers. But I could probably do an episode on Crazy Frog pretty sober. There'd probably be enough for me to talk about that I could just about get through the episode.
So my last thing was, if you were to just consider these 25 top best-selling songs of all time, what would your formula to make a hit single be?
You've got to be... I mean, one thing, which I'll probably talk about when I do my top 5, don't rap, because rap doesn't get any showing in the top 25. So... Like, the highest charting rapper is T.I. on Blurred Lines. And, I mean, that song wasn't popular because T.I. was there. It's just he happens to be on the song. So don't rap. I can give you a list of do's and don'ts, shall I?
Yeah.
Don't rap. Don't swear, because there's very little cursing in any of these. Do try and make your production as bland as possible. Or, if you're not going to do that, do something that nobody has ever done before. Which I think even the really good songs, the reason, like, that... Shares Believe is there because it was the first song that properly used autotune. I know there were lots of songs that had used it, but no one gives a shit about some like Icelandic singer making some album track that uses autotune. People do care about big pop stars using it. So I think either do something super, super original, which is like, God knows how you do that, or if you're not going to do that, either tie your song to a movie or an event or a period in time where it's going to like sell a lot of copies off the back of it. And also, if you want double points, make it very, very boring. Because something that's on in the background gets played on the radio much more than something that's like abrasive and memorable. So weirdly, my formula would kind of be a bit crap. Or at least that seems to be the general consensus from going for the top 25.
So in the next part, we're going to talk about our top 5 of the top 200 biggest selling songs of all time.
Do you want to go first with your number 5?
Yeah, so first on my list is Alexandra Burke's Hallelujah, which is a cover of one of the greatest pop songs ever written. It was Leonard Cohen who wrote it originally in the 80s, but when he wrote it, it wasn't released as a single. It wasn't particularly successful, and it was kind of forgotten about. And it's very like dark and almost dirge-like. He sings it in almost a growl. But it's a lyrical masterpiece, and Leonard Cohen originally wrote it as an 80-verse poem, and it draws inspiration from loads of different sources like the Bible and the Torah, and it's so masterfully written that you can sing it in multiple ways. It can be like a really desperate song and really hopeless song, like how Leonard Cohen wrote it and performed it, or it can be like a song of hope or something joyous or even a hymn. And kind of over the decades, the song grew to acclaim through a number of covers, first of all, and most prominently by Velvet Underground member John Cale, who when he did the cover version that's in the Shrek film.
Yeah, which is often like wrongly attributed to Rufus Wainwright, and I do like Rufus Wainwright's version, but my favourite version of the song is the John Cale version.
Yeah.
So like often, like when people will do playlists of like songs from Shrek, they pick the Rufus Wainwright one, but I think it is the John Cale one that's actually in Shrek. It's just they're very similar because they're more sort of piano driven.
Then it was covered by Jeff Buckley, who's kind of an American singer-songwriter who died very young, but his version's always been one of the highly acclaimed versions. But the definitive version was the John Cale one, because he kind of looked at all of the various permutations that Leonard Cohen had sang. When Leonard Cohen used to sing it, he used to basically go back to the 80-verse poem, select the verses that he wanted to sing on that particular night, and then just perform that. Cale looked through all those performances and kind of compiled what he thought the best version was, and that's the one that everyone seems to cover. It's been covered like it must be nearly like 500 times, like official covers that you can go out to like a record shop and buy. And Alexandra Burke's version, it's not like overwhelmingly impassioned like the Jeff Buckley or the Leonard Cohen version, but it's a very, very talented vocal and very powerful vocal. And I think what makes her version stand out is that she changed it from being like a very dark and philosophical song, and her production and the way that she sang it kind of made it into a pop song, and it kind of was subversive in that way. It flew under the radar until you had like middle-aged women and teenagers singing these very like emotive and very very well-written lyrics, and I guess it kind of led to the resurgence in the interest in Leonard Cohen's career, particularly at that point in time, because it became like one of his highest charting singles after people went out and bought it after buying the Alexandra Burke version. And I think it's quite important because it was the first female British singer to sell over 1 million copies, which is pretty impressive. She didn't like the song. That's the one thing that I don't like. She said that the song doesn't really do anything for her. And if you could like perform Hallelujah like that, and if you understand the lyrics, how can that not in some way affect you? Because it's such a it's a stunning song.
Yeah, but
it's very emotive.
It probably shows how good of an actress she is.
Yeah.
You know, like that she can fake it, sort of thing. But yeah, no, I like that choice. I mean, again, I prefer other versions. I wouldn't in any way put Alexandra Burke's version as the definitive version.
Yeah.
I probably like the John Cale one. I'm not a huge fan of the Jeff Buckley one. It's a bit wobbly, and I don't think it really works on guitar. I think he did do a piano version as well, but I think the most famous version is on guitar, and I don't think it works as well myself. It's more of a piano ballad to me, and I always thought Jeff Buckley was very overrated. Yeah. But because he died young and under slightly odd circumstances, I feel like he's remembered maybe better than he actually... I don't want to say he was shit. He wasn't. He was talented, but it wasn't as good as maybe people remember him being. Let's be honest.
He had potential. That's the thing with Jeff Buckley.
Yeah.
You don't know what he would have gone on to do. And I definitely think the better part of his career was probably ahead of him when he died. Yeah. What's your number 5, Dan?
So my number 5, I'm not in any way ashamed of this top 5. These are my legitimate favourite of these top 200. But I had to be entirely honest. I've picked a double A-side, and I like both songs. It's Heartbeat and Tragedy, double A-side by Steps. Now, I have reason, like, this is a personal reason I picked this song. It was actually the first single I ever bought, or I should say, was bought for me. For my 6th birthday, I think my parents got me, like, a portable cassette player, and my granny got me a cassette, double A-side of this song, and I listened to it, like, constantly. So I'm not in any way going to go to ground that this is better than, like, some of the other things on the list. You know, like Hound Dog is on the sort of, like, on the top 200, and I haven't picked that. I'm not going to say that Steps' Heartbeat and Tragedy double A-side is a better song than Elvis doing Hound Dog. I fully accept that it's probably, if anything, my controversial pick. But the song just, it reminds me of being 6. It reminds me of having a little shitty cassette player, which, let's be honest, on reflection, cassettes were quite rubbish. They've had a bit of a resurgence recently, and I don't quite get why. Because they were a rubbish format. The thing was, I understand vinyls, provided, like, because some things do sound better on vinyl. They do. Because if the song was recorded to be played on a vinyl, it was, when they produced it, they optimised it for a vinyl, which is why, like, old Motown records, if you listen to them on vinyl, they sound better than on CD. Because often what they've done with the CD version is try and recreate the sound of the vinyl.
Yeah.
I mean, not everything. Like, newer vinyls, they're, like, really sturdy, heavy stuff. Like, I find that can be a bit rubbish because it gets a lot of static and it, like, skips forward. But I do get vinyl. I can get why it's a format that hasn't died, because there's something about, like, the ritual of putting on a vinyl and playing the record. And
the cover art being massive, that's always a good plus point.
Yeah, and they just look cool in your house, like having a big stack of vinyls. But cassettes were always crap. Like, the only benefit cassettes had over CDs was, A, they were significantly cheaper.
Yeah.
And B, like, you could have a portable cassette players. For portable CD players were always a bit rubbish. You had to, like, keep them flat on your hand. Unless you had one of the really expensive, like, shock ones. But nobody had one of those because they were, like, 400 quid. So everyone had cassette players, which is why they had a little bit of, like, lifespan into the sort of 2000s. I think they were still, you know, regularly being bought. And plus you had, like, the B-side version, which you didn't really have on CDs. You did have B-sides, but it was more that, like, there's something about the ritual of flipping the cassette and listening to the B-side, which was kind of exciting, as for you never really got that with CDs. But once we now have MP3s, there is no need to revisit cassettes. You know, there is no need. I don't get why... Like, if you still want to own physical media and you don't want to own vinyl, own CDs. But for some reason, people have now started collecting cassettes, and I don't quite get why. It feels like it's just this super hipster thing that people are doing for the sake of being like, I'm going to pick a dead format and be like, this is the greatest thing. Nothing sounds better on cassette. Like, there's no artist ever who you're going to get the best listening experience by listening to their songs on cassette. It doesn't exist. Because I will fully concede that, this choice of Steps, you know, I love it, but if I was to re-listen to these two songs, I'd listen to them on, like, Spotify. I wouldn't be, like, finding that old cassette and trying to relive the magic. But yeah, I like Steps. For our American listeners, they were... Pete Waterman, who we talked about in the Band-Aid episode last week, they were kind of his brainchild. He sort of sold them as, like, a 90s version of ABBA. Which they weren't, because they didn't write their own songs and they weren't much like ABBA. But they were a mixed sex group, so there was male and female. I guess that was kind of what it was. Sort of a lot of 90s Euro dance. They're very fun. They're still together now. And if you want to have a good evening, go and watch Steps live.
They're very British. I think you've got to be British to get them. Like, particularly those music videos, which are hilarious.
Yes.
Tragedy!
Yeah, they were very much in on the joke as well. They did a lot of, like, over-the-top music videos, lots of bright colours, and, you know, they were very popular with children between the ages of sort of 5 and 8, which was I was the perfect age, and never really outgrew them. And I fully accept that nostalgia is my driving reason why they're in my top 5, not because they're actually the greatest artist of all time.
But they're a great pop band, aren't they? They're a great pop band. They do everything that you want a pop act to do. They're fun, they're doing it for a laugh, the tunes are catchy, you can dance to them, they're memorable. Everything you want from a pop band.
I saw them live in Cardiff not too long ago, and it's still one of the most fun evenings you'll have. So, you know, sometimes people sort of turn their nose up to cheesy pop music, but there's a part of your brain that if you can get over your own sort of neurosis about not being cool and just enjoying yourself, then Steps are the perfect band, really.
Yeah. So my number 4, and this is by no means the ultimate version of this song. If the original was in this list, I would easily put that higher up. It may even be my number one. But it's Perfect Day by various artists. Perfect Day is obviously a song written by Lou Reed. It appeared on his 1972 album Transformer, produced by Mick Ronson and David Bowie. And it's truly is a masterpiece. It's one of the best love songs of all time. And I think a lot of it is down to Lou Reed's amazing lyrics. It would be so easy to write in like a grandiose fashion about having a perfect day with someone that you love, but this simplistic and very like poetic version is something. It's something really special that I think a lot of songs should emulate. This particular version, it was recorded by the BBC for like an information campaign about what their license fee was being spent on. And it aimed to show the entire diversity of the talent that the BBC can recruit and all of the various genres that it caters to. And after the advert aired, it was obviously there was a lot of demand to go out and buy a single, and they released it in aid of children in need. And essentially the song features a whole bunch of performers, some more famous than others, some definitely were of their time, very late 90s, and you won't have really heard of, but it had people like Lou Reed himself, David Bowie, Bono, Elton John, Tom Jones, and a whole heap of very famous people. And they all essentially share the song, they sing a line, and it just displays their talent. And the thing that I love about that concept is that a lot of the performers really play up to who people think they are. Like, the Lou Reed that you see in this song is like a cartoon Lou Reed, deadpan, just mumbling. The David Bowie's kind of cheeky, looking really, really weird, and the Bono that you see is obviously, he looks like a dickhead, and he is a dickhead. And it kind of plays up to the juxtapositions that exist in the original song, and how the perfect day is mundane, etc. And I think I think it really is one of the best charity singles ever released, because it does do something different. Like, it doesn't go back to the Band-Aid, everyone's all together and everyone's happy thing, the blueprint that was kind of created by that. It kind of does its own thing, and it's not looking to make one united statement. It's all about individuality. And it has some really interesting people, like Laurie Anderson. She's like a very weird, out there electronic artist, and Dr. John, who's like a very mysterious, swampy blues man. It gave them the number ones that they rightfully deserve. At the time, The Guardian did criticise it because they were like, so the BBC spent a ton of money on this advert to show what it's doing with our licence fee. Isn't that like a bit hypocritical? But it turned out that the artists that appeared on it were only paid like a token £250 artist fee. It's had quite a bit of a legacy. The BBC's obviously tried to go back and recreate the success of the song, but they've kind of failed at every attempt that they've made. They did it in 2000, again with people like Lou Reed, but they kind of had to step away from that pretty quickly because they included Rolf Harris on it.
The only thing I would comment about Perfect Day is when we saw Lou Reed, he didn't play it. In fact, he didn't play, like, I think like the only song I'd heard of was he did like a version of Femme Fatale, the Velvet Underground song. Everything else was stuff I'd never heard of, which is fine if we'd gone to a Lou Reed concert, I guess, but it was a festival. Like, you play the hits at a festival, unless you're Lou Reed, in which case, I'm going to play you a song from 1994 that nobody remembers. Shall I introduce my number 4?
Go ahead.
I'm going to be fairly sort of short and sweet, because we've spoken about the song before, but I Feel Love, Donna Summer. I mean, it needs to be in my top 5. I think I said everything I like about that song in a previous episode, so go and listen to the other 20-plus episodes and figure out where I said it. But yes, I mean, it's a great song. I've got nothing bad to say about it.
My number 3 pick is Tainted Love by Soft Cell. So Tainted Love started life as a soul song written for Gloria Jones, who released it as a B-side to a single that was an absolute commercial failure, but obviously everyone thought that it had potential, and it's now recognised by NME as one of the greatest songs of all time. Jones even had another attempt later in the 70s at making it a hit. She teamed up with Mark Bolan on production, and again that flopped. Mark Almond of Soft Cell undoubtedly knew the song through the Mark Bolan connection, because he's like a massive Mark Bolan nerd. He changed his name to Mark with a C because of Mark Bolan. The genius is in the way that Mark Almond changes all of the natural instruments that are very that kind of give the original all its character into synthesized bass, synthesized drums, and it's really cold and stark, and it's juxtaposed so beautifully with his like really passionate vocal, which it's been criticized as like being off key like fairly constantly throughout the song, and it kind of is. He's not the greatest singer, but he puts like a lot of effort into that song. The amazing thing about it is it kind of was a jam. He didn't really go into the studio going, I'm going to record this cover version. He basically was recording a different single, and they had a bit of spare time in the studio, so they started playing around with the synthesizers. And the label itself, this was their second single, and they told the band, if this isn't a hit, this is it, you're going to be dropped. And it became one of like not only the biggest UK singles, it was in the Billboard Hot 100 for about 43 weeks. And even Gloria Jones admits it's better than her version, which is like the biggest accolade that you could give.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably definitely it's one of the best cover versions of all time.
Yeah.
I love Tainted Love. I mean, I don't really have anything to add that you haven't said. It's really clever how you listen to the original and it does sound just like a soul song.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not forgettable, it is memorable, but I think the reason it's so memorable is because you think of the Soft Cell cover.
What's your number 3?
I mean, I don't think I would have put this song as high as I put it if it wasn't for the fact that one of the things that becomes incredibly apparent when looking at the top 200 is there's very little rap music.
Yeah.
When there is a rapper on the top 200, it's usually they're featured on another song. So, like, Snoop Dogg's only appearance is on Katy Perry's California Girls, which is, like, that's his only appearance in the whole top 200. You know, and he's collaborated with God knows how many artists all the time. But the only time that a rapper appears in the top 200 is when they're supporting, like, another artist, and they're kind of almost like an afterthought. So I really, really wanted to put a hip-hop artist in the top 200, and the only one where it is a rap song, and even then it's a quote-unquote rap song, is my number 3 pick, which is It's Like That, Run DMC, but it's not just Run DMC, it's a remix by Jason Nevins. So it's Run DMC, they call it versus Jason Nevins, but it's basically they took their single It's Like That and they kind of did a remix. Similar to how Fatboy Slim did a remix of Body Moving by the Beastie Boys, like around the same sort of time. It was a couple of years later, but around about the same sort of time, where he took a reasonable, like an averagely successful rap song and then kind of remixed it, and it got a sort of second lease of life. So I wouldn't normally be like, if you were to ask me, you know, my top, I don't know, even my top 500 rap songs of all time, I probably wouldn't include this. It's not even my favourite Run DMC song.
Yeah.
But I felt like I can't complain about there not being any hip-hop artists in the top 200, or very few hip-hop artists. And even the ones that are there are like, they're after like the 100 mark. I think Jay-Z's in there with Empire State of Mind, but he's like 150 or something. Like, he's really... And I thought about concluding that, because at least it is a Jay-Z song. As for this, I mean, it is a Run DMC song, but it's a remix. It's still very good, and it's a great song, but I probably wouldn't put it like number 3 if it wasn't for the fact that it's the only chance that a rapper's going to get at being that high. And I had to be honest, my number 2 and number 1 pick, I do like more. Yeah. So, you know, 3 was as high as I was going to put it. If I was to be like political about it, I would have put it at number 1 and been like, the British public needs to listen to more hip hop. But, you know, what do you want? I put it at 3. You know, this is a personal list.
Yeah.
If anything was to change tomorrow, it would probably be that one. But I included it. So, yeah. I don't really have much more to say about that. Because, like I said, it's a perfectly fine song. But, you know, it's more there on principle than because I love it.
That was the one that I only questioned. The only one that I questioned when I saw your list. Because I was like, really? But now that makes complete sense. My number 2 is Heart of Glass by Blondie. From 1978, fantastic year for music. The reason I've picked this is because it's a really interesting combination of punk and disco, kind of with a pop filter on it as well. It sold 1.3 million copies in the UK, and it's the 66th best-selling single of all time. It was originally titled The Disco Song, and it was one of Blondie singer Deborah Harry's first songs that she wrote. It took 4 years from the point of her writing the lyrics to actually get in the studio and record it, and during that 4 years it went from various permutations. It went to like a reggae version, it went to a pop power ballad, and eventually they settled on this really weird fusion of punk and disco that the band, the producer, the record label, they all at first were like, this is sacrilege. We're Chrysalis Records, we're a punk label, we do punk music. We've got Lou Reed, we've got other punk artists. We can't just put out a disco single. And the drummer famously refused to play it live until it became a hit. It was recorded basically with some spare time at the end of the sessions for the album. And it kind of, if you listen to it, you can really sense that there were Kraftwerk influences going on there, because it starts with like the very rhythmic, very mechanical roll and drum machine, which it was one of the first pop singles to actually have a roll and drum machine on it, which is groundbreaking. And Deborah Harry actually said that one of the main things that she wanted to do was recreate Donna Summer's I Feel Love. The overall aim was to make it as processed and mechanical as possible, and they even went as far as getting the drummer to record every piece of the drum kit individually. The record actually uses like various takes all blended together. So for example, the bass drum is like 3 different bass drums mixed down that you can hear. It's so like unusually complex for such a simple pop song, and that complexity is also reflected in the rhythm that it takes, because it's not just a simple disco 4/4 beat that's continuous so that you can dance to it. In the chorus, it switches to 7/4, which is a completely like obscure timing that not a lot of bands would be able to pull off. And yeah, it was released to a massive backlash from the punk scene, who absolutely thought that Blondie were sellouts, and they went and tore down all their posters of Debbie Harry that they'd previously been wanking over. But the actual record buying public liked it. They got it straight to the number 1 spot, and it kind of started their chart-topping career.
Yeah, and I think that's a great choice for number 2. I'll pick my number 2, which, when I originally wrote this list, I put this one at number 5.
Yeah.
And then I had to be honest about myself. I was like, you know what? Actually, no. This song means more to me than, like, I'm going to bump steps down and bump this song all the way back up to number 2. So it's Free Lions by the comedians Baddiel and Skinner and the Lightning Seeds. Now, I want to preference this by saying, first of all, we have a lot of American listeners who won't know who Baddiel and Skinner are. Frank Skinner and David Baddiel, they're both very successful comedians. And it's kind of a novelty song, but it's more than a novelty song. For any listener within the UK, any English listener will be like, of course I know what Free Lions is, why are you explaining this to me? Anybody outside of the UK, unless you're German, because this song, surprisingly, is hugely successful among Germans. In fact, I've met Germans that love this song, but I'll talk about that in a second. It's a football song. Now, I would like to preface this with saying I'm not a football fan. I don't support a football team.
Yeah.
I never watch football. In fact, nothing bores me more than being sat watching a football match, unless it's England in the World Cup. Once every 4 years, and it's probably the only time I become nationalistic and I become patriotic for being English, is every 4 years the Football World Cup comes along, and suddenly I A, pretend like I'm a fan of football, and B, I actually watch football by choice. I never otherwise would choose in a million years to sit down and watch football. But during the World Cup, there's something about, like, if I was to write a list of, like, the top 100 things I want to do before I die, like, most of those would be things that proactively I can do. Like, I've never been scuba diving. That's on my top 100 list of things to do. One of the things that's completely beyond my control, but would still be on that list, would be watch England win the World Cup. And maybe at some point in my lifetime, that will happen. Yeah. I have no power and influence over that. However, this song captures that kind of optimistic feel of we might one day win. There's something about the refrain at the end, about it sings over and over again that football's coming home, football's coming home. And it's become like the unofficial anthem of England football team in general. So at matches, like, win or lose, you will hear the crowd singing, "It's coming home, it's coming home." The great thing about the song is those, like, completely natural sort of stadium chants are very difficult to write. Like, you or I could not write as good of a hook. Like, no human being on the planet could, apart from the Lightning Seeds, because most of the music was written by the Lightning Seeds, who I love in of themselves. They were a great brand. They're probably the best song after Free Lions was a song called Life of Riley. So if anybody was like, oh, you're saying they're a great band, but give us another hit example. they did do, they had many other hits, but that's kind of the one that I think stands out.
Yeah.
There's something about Three Lions that, I don't know, it taps into a part of my psyche that I didn't think was there. A part of me that gives a shit about football, gives a shit about being English. I wouldn't be surprised. There's a version of me in, God knows how many years where, we just win the World Cup and I'm walking through the town centre of wherever I'm living at the time, very drunk, and I bump into a group of, working class shirtless football fans, and we all put our arms around each other and sing It's Coming Home. And that actually feels like something I could see myself doing when in normal, general day-to-day life, I am not that person at all. But there's something communal about the song. There's something, that it's just something warm about it that I really like.
It's very British. It's kind of like a pessimistic optimism, because it's we're not very good, but we're going to do it this time. We're going to win this time. I think it really captures the British spirit, because it's kind of patriotic, but embarrassingly patriotic, being embarrassed of being good.
English spirit, we should preference.
Yeah.
I don't think it would work if it was for a national team, because I feel like if we had, because it's a conversation that often we have, is should we, instead of having an English football team, have a British football team? But I don't think it would work, because the Welsh are very proud of being Welsh. We've talked about this before. The Scottish are proud of being Scottish. Some Northern Irish are proud of being Northern Irish.
Yeah.
English people generally aren't. Some English people are, but we kind of look down on those people that are super proud of being English. But, somebody who had an England flag bumper sticker in the UK, you'd kind of okay, what's their game? Unless it was the World Cup. There's a 3-week period every 4 years where you're allowed to be proud to be English. You're allowed to drape yourself in the St. George's Cross. And if you've got a problem with it, you're the one with the problem. As for the rest of the year, the rest of the, every couple of years that this happens, you would be looked upon as it is a bit odd.
And we're speaking as people who, during a World Cup, we put a massive England St. George's Cross on the back of my car, and we're driving around the town centre.
I wonder if this song will have a new meaning if we ever do win. Because, like I said, at the moment, it represents this kind of underdog spirit. And for a very brief period of time, it will be the victory anthem. The day that England finally win the World Cup again, after 50 plus years of losing, will be the day that this song gets played to death. It'll be a number one single. It's one of those songs that you're just waiting for the time period. A bit like Prince's 1999. That was waiting for the millennium. The Queen is Dead by the Smiths is waiting for when the Queen finally dies, and that will rechart, But Three Lions by Baddiel and Skinner and the Lightning Seeds will either get a re-recorded version, just in time for us to win the World Cup, or it will rechart when we win. It's just a case of when, not if.
Yeah, and I'm bloody buying it.
Win. And I bloody will as well. And it's one of the few patriotic tunes. America gets shitloads of songs about how great it is to be an American.
Yeah.
Let English people have a song about how great it is being English.
Yeah. Make it the national anthem.
Change.org. Let's have that debated in Parliament. COVID's over. It's time we started focusing on the
real
serious
issues.
I think I've made my case for that song being number 2.
Yeah. I think you've sold that song to me. I think I think that may be one of the best number 1 singles of all time.
Do you want to pick your number 1?
Yeah, so for my number 1, I've picked Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick by Ian Dury and the Blockheads, which is another 1978 single. It's sold around 1.3 million copies in the UK and is the 115th biggest selling single of all time. Ian Dury is one of rock's greatest and most distinctive frontmen. As a child, he suffered from polio, which left him physically disabled, but he kind of grew into the role of the outsider, and he played up to the fact that he knew he wasn't like other people, and he displayed that through his performances, but also through his really distinctive, wacky, unique lyrics. And Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick is probably the quintessential Ian Dury single. And like Heart of Glass, it kind of combines tons of genres. I think they were very influenced by jazz, very influenced by disco, and they are a punk band. They've got a very punk attitude, but I like to call them sophisticated punk because they draw from such a wide selection of inspirations. The bass line is absolutely phenomenal, notoriously tricky to play, and it borrows from avant-garde performers, and somehow they managed to forge that together with like a really danceable disco beat. It's incredible. And things like the instrumentation, the saxophonist, he plays the saxophone solo with two saxophones at the same time. It's phenomenal, and it was recorded live. It's a live take. All the band were in the studio together. Ian Dury was on a handheld microphone. They just sang it a couple of times, picked one of the takes, and that was it. And that's how punk should be. It's like a very homemade production, and it's funky, it's danceable, it's really witty and tongue-in-cheek, and the lyrics are very British. Like, I'm not, there must be a double entendre somewhere in there, because it's very like, oh, hit me with your rhythm stick, Ikliberdick, stuff like that. It's just everything. I just like it. Can I say that?
Yeah, I think you can say that. I mean, this is an opinion-based one, and we're not like pitting these songs like on a ranking of like, you know, let's analyse the lyrics out of 100 and like add it up like it's some mathematical like system to work these out. It's purely personal choice. I also love Ian Dury and the Blockheads. One of those, like, if I had a time machine, I'd love to have seen them like before Ian Dury passed. We saw the Blockheads, but I mean, it's not the same. I mean, it's kind of the same. It's the same band, but you know, without Ian Dury, it loses something. Well, obviously, it loses its frontman. What am I saying? Of course, it loses something. It loses Ian Dury and the Blockheads and becomes just the Blockheads. But yeah, no, I love Ian Dury. I think they were great bands. Shall I introduce my number one?
Yeah, go for it.
This isn't just my favourite song on this list. It's probably my favourite song of all time.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw the list and I saw that this was on there, not only was it number one, I was like, if you had said, you know, pick your top 10 songs of all time, this would have been number one by a significant margin. Yeah. It's Blue Monday by New Order, which I just love that song. I should preference there's lots and lots of versions. There's several single edits. There was a 1988 remix. I think there was another remix in the 90s. It's been re-released. It's been... God knows how many people have remixed it, but the version I like is the original 12-inch, like 8.5 minute proper version.
Yeah.
The producer, Guy Chambers, who produces almost all of Robbie Williams' stuff, but he's produced for other people over the years, he has a rule that a pop song should never be longer than 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And I've got to be honest, I almost always agree with him. I don't think a song should be longer than 4 minutes. Unless every now and then something comes along and completely breaks that exception. Bohemian Rhapsody is an example of a song that, you know, needs to be 5 minutes, otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Blue Monday needs to be 8.5 minutes. Cutting it down is like, to me, it's like cutting out parts of Bohemian Rhapsody. It's supposed to be played either in a nightclub, although I've got to be honest, I've never actually listened to it in a nightclub, or the main version I listen to it is I put on the full 12-inch version when, like, I'm having, like, pre-drinks and we're going out. Like, the amount of nights that have started, like, with us putting on Blue Monday by New Order. It's just fantastic. For those that have never heard it, the title Blue Monday means nothing. New Order had this thing where they would kind of name their songs whatever the fuck they wanted, or sometimes they would name the song after another song on the same album and then name that song something different just to confuse people. So if you're wondering why it's called Blue Monday, it doesn't mean anything. You're overthinking it. There's a funny little bit of like urban myth behind the song. So allegedly when the first 12-inch pressing came out, it cost them 5 pence to produce, more than like a profit they were making. So every single record they sold, they lost 5 pence. Now, other people have come forward and said that's not actually true. They had quite a sort of, I guess, eccentric is maybe the word, record head called Tony Wilson, who he started out as like a Granada producer for television and then went on to run this incredibly successful but also financially incredibly unsuccessful record label who just wasted shitloads of money on pointless stuff. But almost all of their artists were great and almost everything they put out was brilliant. It was called Factory Records. But this was one of their sort of biggest hits. A lot of the money from this song was funneled into a failing nightclub called the Hacienda Club.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is in itself, there's so much story behind what happened before this song was recorded, then after the success of the song, and then after that. It's just brilliant. It works on every level. If I was like a music teacher trying to teach somebody like music theory, I would hate somebody to bring Blue Monday to me because it doesn't make sense. Like, half the instruments aren't in time with each other. At certain points, it almost feels like they're just playing, like, they've all got headphones in and they're just sort of playing what they feel like the song should sound like. But it all works together in a way that, like, kind of defies logic. It works brilliantly. It sounds incredibly futuristic, but at the same time, it's got this, like, indie pop kind of, like, underground punk edge to it. The lyrics are great. The singing is great. The bass line is probably one of the best bass lines in a song ever. I don't even know what to say about it other than if you don't listen to that initial sort of if you don't listen to that like drum intro at the beginning and it doesn't make your spine tingle, you're dead inside because it's so fantastic.
It's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I feel like this show, unintentionally, we've been very, very negative. Not because we're negative people, but just because we've been talking about things that we don't like. And if on the one end of the spectrum of like pop music that I don't like is things like Paul McCartney and Mull of Kintyre, on the opposite side of the spectrum is New Order with Blue Monday. Like, that to me is, if you want to know, like, okay, well, if that's really shit, what is great then? This is what great looks like. This is what all musicians should aspire to be. It's gone on to influence pretty much everybody that came afterwards. Noel Gallagher has said that without Blue Monday, Oasis wouldn't have existed. The Killers took their name from a later New Order music video, which, like, they've come out and Brandon Flowers has basically said, again, without New Order, the Killers wouldn't have existed. I mean, there's so many great bands and artists that, you know, because of Blue Monday have gone on to have such greatness. It's fantastic.
No, I agree with you. It's very inventive, and it's 8 minutes long, but it's not boring. That's one of the main things that I have, the issues that I have with songs of that length, is that at some point you think, oh, well, I wish this would end now. But with Blue Monday, it's just like, I want it to continue. Keep going.
Yeah. I think the other thing is as well, we've talked before about like nostalgia and how music can sometimes be like a point in your life. And the funny thing is, like, I mean, I've always known about Blue Monday. My dad's a big New Order fan, so I always grew up with like their music being played in the house. But it reminds me specifically of the years like when I was like 15 to 21, because like we played that song constantly. Like that and Kanye's Dark Twisted Fantasy were like the two things that every night, regardless of where we went out or regardless of what we were doing, we would play like on loop, and I'm still not sick of it. You know, I could listen to it right now. If we were to go out tomorrow, because, you know, nightclubs are opening magically tomorrow, let's say, and we were to put on a song, I would put on that song and I'm in a good mood. Yeah. You know? I don't have any, like, bad memories associated to that song. I talked in, like, the last Christmas episode how I have a slightly depressing story that kind of colours my opinion of that song. The opposite can be said for Blue Monday. I only have positive memories and I only have, like, good moments of my life. I think I might even have it as my funeral song. I'm not sure. Like, I quite like the idea of this, like, I'm going to be cremated. Just, I mean, you might be there. You know, as the coffin, like, goes backwards, I'd like somebody to time my coffin to, like, go do, and, like, go out and then go back in a bit and then go back out and then go. Like that. And that's, like, the final moment of, like, people are crying because I'm awesome. And, you know, they just had a brilliant eulogy, which I've written myself. You know, and they're crying because, you know, it's the last funny thing I'm ever going to do. And then, just as my coffin disappears, it goes do, and it goes in and out, and it reverses but forward and backwards. And everyone then is in a good mood to go to my wake, where the first song they will hear as they walk in will be Blue Monday. I've already tipped the DJ. He's got an amazing set list full of step songs and full of, you know, Frankie Goes to Hollywood songs and probably some Scissor Sisters songs. Just joyous, happy music. And they're going to have a fucking great time. And that's the only time I've sworn this episode. I tried going a whole episode without swearing, but I didn't want to draw attention to it. But yeah, and that's my opinion of Blue Monday. Cheers.
Well, we've done it. That's it. Thanks for watching. Let us know what your favourite chart hit is in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more music commentary. Next week, it's the final episode of Season 1, and we're going to be talking about Elton John's Candle in the Wind 97.
Ugh. I mean, I'm going to try and be more positive. I've done a lot of research for this episode.
Okay.
So it won't be really nasty. I'm hoping every negative episode is behind us, and now we're only going to have positive episodes. And then when we eventually, in like 5 weeks' time, get a comment saying, you guys are too positive, you love everything, I can be like, go back and listen to the like 20 odd episodes where I'm an arsehole. One good thing we can say about next week is I will sound better, because I've been using this stupid shitty microphone for God knows how many weeks. We never intended to record the podcast like this. We intended for proper video and proper audio, and it not to sound super amateur and shit, but COVID has got in the way and we didn't want to put it on hold, but it will sound better. Thank you for sticking with us. We have regular subscribers now who listen every week, and as soon as an episode comes out, our listening figures show there's a big spike. So thank you to those people, and thanks for sticking with us, because it will be better next week. And from then onwards. It's not just going to be a one-off, hopefully.
Unless Ebola comes and gets us next.